welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of KevinMD. Today in the show, we have Jonathan Reisman. He is an internal medicine pediatrics physician. He's the author of the book, The Unseen Body, A Doctor's Journey Through the Hidden Wonders of Human Anatomy. There's an excerpt from that book on KevinMD titled, We Are Actually Made of Mucus. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
So we'll get into your excerpt and book in a little bit, but first off, can you just share your story and journey to where you are today?
Sure. So I would say my journey sort of started in college when I became really interested in the natural world and in traveling. And so that led to sort of an adventurous spirit and a wanderlust that I ended up carrying into my medical career, and that has sort of shaped my medical career. When I first got interested in those things, I did not want to be a doctor, had no interest in going to medical school, but eventually did end up going to medical school and sort of have tried to incorporate my love of travel, my love of the natural world, and including human culture and just all the different interesting things to see in the world that have helped sort of shape my medical career and also led to my writing, which led to this book. So I sort of brought that kind of interest in different cultures and how the natural world has shaped our bodies and has shaped the practice of medicine and the medications that we use, has led to me kind of wanting to travel all over the world and practice medicine and at the ends of the earth, which has also provided some good stories that ended up in my book.
So give us an example of how your love of travel in the natural world, how does that intersect with your clinical practice today?
Well, so it's certainly been harder to travel the last 2 years, and I also have 2 small children, which has made it even harder. Mm-hmm. But I did, a few months after finishing residency, I went to do a locum tenens job in an emergency room in Arctic, Alaska. Even though I had not trained in emergency medicine and trained in internal medicine pediatrics, I was just sort of always been fascinated with the traditional cultures of the natives of the far north. And so I made some connections and just flew there for an entire month and worked in the ER. And it was really very rewarding. I learned a lot and sort of led to my path where I mostly work in the emergency room now, various rural emergency rooms. So I've since worked on an Indian reservation in South Dakota, and I've done some wilderness medicine trips as ship doctor in Antarctica and the Russian Arctic, and worked at high altitude in Nepal. As I've said, the last few years have been harder to travel, but that's sort of how I've shaped my career.
So you clearly worked in a lot of disparate, remote rural areas around the world. What's some of the biggest things that you've learned from these?
The biggest thing, is the doctor's mindset, where if you're working in a big university hospital and have every kind of medical imaging technology and every lab test at your ready, and including every subspecialist as well available to come see your patient, that's almost a different universe from being sort of in the middle of Arctic Alaska, let's say, where everything is airplane evacuation. And if it's very foggy, or like one time when there were a lot of tundra fires in northern Alaska, and the wind was blowing all the smoke through the town I was working in called Kotzebue, and just it was impossible. No planes could come or go, and so no matter how sick your patient was, you were kind of stuck with them, and there was no specialist to help you. So it's a very different mindset of evacuation and kind of planning ahead and being resourceful.
So how did you adapt to that?
A lot of nervousness and worry, but I had a patient, for instance, with an obstructing gallstone who needed a ERCP, a scope to remove the stone, and the smoke was blowing through town, and he could not leave and was sort of getting sicker, getting a fever. And I was looking up on YouTube how to do a procedure called a percutaneous Coley tube. Luckily, he passed the stone on his own, so I didn't have to try it for the first time up there. But those are the kind of situations you sometimes find yourself in.
All right, let's talk about your book and article. Your book's titled The Unseen Body, A Doctor's Journey Through the Hidden Wonders of Human Anatomy. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read your book or read the excerpt, tell us a little bit about it and the story of why you decided to write it.
Sure. So as I said, I was fascinated with the natural world. I kind of saw myself as an amateur naturalist. I loved reading the great naturalist writers like Henry David Thoreau and Emerson and Barry Lopez and others. Kind of wanted to be a nature writer, wanted to be a travel writer, and then started medical school. And I sort of brought that same mindset to learning about the human body, and sort of took a similar approach as a nature writer or travel writer might take, exploring a new world, kind of learning all about the species of animal and plant and fungus and the unique human cultures, and thinking deeply about what they see and connecting it to kind of unexpected things, aspects of life, history, what we're made of and how we live and relate to each other. And so I tried to bring that same approach to the human body. So this book is kind of my attempt to be the Henry David Thoreau of the human body instead of Walden Pond in a way.
So talk about the excerpt that you wrote. It's titled "We Are Actually Made of Mucus." Fascinating title.
Right. So, my book has a chapter on mucus, naturally, a very important bodily fluid, and one that I always found fascinating, that people, including nurses and doctors, seem to be the most grossed out by mucus, more than anything else, more than vomit, stool. It's all about mucus. So I thought back to when I was in grade school and had learned about how, we are made up of mostly water. That's sort of a refrain that everybody learns in grade school or high school, and it's true. But when I thought about what the human body was made of, there's very little kind of thin water. There's a lot more thicker things, mucus included. Urine is watery, tears are watery. But other than that, most of the things inside of us are flowing out of us, like blood, etc., are thicker. Blood is thicker than water. That's physiologically true as well. And so what I realized is that, it's misleading to say we're mostly made of water. What we're actually made of is a thicker, kind of more gelatinous thing that oozes instead of flows. So we're mostly made of mucus, is the truth.
All right. What are some other unexpected things about our body that you want my audience to know about from reading your book?
In the chapter on urine, I talk about how urine is my favorite bodily fluid, not only because it's so useful clinically and tells you all about the urinary tract through which it flows, but also other parts of the body. We diagnose diabetes type 1, the failing of the pancreas through the urine. You can diagnose, you can see what drugs someone ate recently. You can determine what type of microbe is causing their pneumonia with certain urine tests. So urine almost seemed this all-seeing fluid. And I also always loved how the salt proportions in the urine, in our blood, which are maintained by the flow of urine from the kidneys, sort of matches the oceans, high in sodium and chloride, low in potassium. And so I always like thinking about how the kidneys and the flow of urine help us each carry around a little bit of ocean inside of us. And that made me love urine all the more.
All right. And if physicians wanted to kind of get in touch with the more natural side, so if, we don't necessarily have to kind of travel all around the world like you, but let's say physicians wanted to incorporate more naturalism into their practice or into their daily lives, what are some ways they can do that?
Yeah, I think, for us and for our patients, being sort of closer to the natural world, whether that's with recreation, getting outdoors, or even through our diets, obviously that's a big thing, is having a good diet, the kind of less processed, the closer to sort of its origin and nature the food is, probably the healthier. But also I think there's a lot of connections that even we don't normally see, when you look at where our medications came from or where they still come from, there's all these natural sources, whether it's antibiotics that come from some random mold growing in the natural world, or Lovenox on the package, it says it comes from the intestines of pigs, or, even convalescent plasma or fecal microbiota transplants come from the bodies of other humans. We're just another corner of the natural world from which you can extract treatments, from blood transfusions to organ transplants. And so, I think the connections are already there. In a way, you just have to see them.
So after writing your book and going through all these fluids and parts of the human body, what are some of the biggest unexpected things that you've learned after writing the book?
Let's see, after writing the book, well, I've gotten in touch with a lot of readers who have, brought to my attention some things that even I hadn't thought about, which is sort of great, maybe fuel for my next book. But, one of the topics, actually, I have a chapter on fat where I travel to tell stories about Arctic Alaska, where the traditional Inupiat diet is very high in fat, but also touch on the, problems of obesity and the patient experience of healthcare. And I've actually learned a lot even since writing the book, where I tried to explore the patient's perspective and how, doctors do tend to kind of have biases and fat shame, and even more, patient perspectives that have been brought to my attention that we're very enlightened since then. And I feel like I've learned a lot by connecting with people.
We're talking to Jonathan Reisman. He is a internal medicine pediatrics physician. He's the author of the book, The Unseen Body, A Doctor's Journey Through the Hidden Wonders of Human Anatomy. Jonathan, for those people who may be inspired from your story, want to travel around the world, practice in more remote settings, where can they get started? What kind of advice do you have for them?
I would say the way I did it was sort of I looked on the map, found a spot that I felt like I wanted to go work in. We're very fortunate as physicians or healthcare providers, our services are needed almost everywhere. And so, I always wanted to go to the far north of Alaska. And so literally looked up the hospitals that are there on Google Maps and called them and said, "Can I talk to your HR department?" One thing led to another. And, they usually need help in some of these remote and rural parts of the country. So it was pretty easy to, they were lucky to find someone who wanted to come, and I was lucky to find that opportunity. So just calling and asking is a big part of it.
And what kind of characteristics should this physician have if they want to practice in under-resourced facilities or areas?
Definitely, being very flexible is very important. You will not find every medical supply and every ability in some of these smaller rural hospitals. I was very surprised by what you can and can't do in some of these places. So it's important to be flexible. It's important to understand your own limitations, the limitations of your medical knowledge, but also important to know where to fill those holes, as needed. Maybe being a little bit of a cowboy, but hopefully not too, adventurous or too dangerous or overstepping the bounds of the scope of your practice or your abilities is very important. But that can be a fine line when you're the only doctor around to help someone.
And my final question, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
I think, for me, I love being a doctor. And one of the best parts of it is the ability is just that we're always learning. And always, at least I've still maintained my fascination with the human body, how it works in both health and disease. I've been practicing for about a decade or so, or about eight to 10 years since residency. And, I think maintaining that fascination is really important, maintaining that love of people, not only their bodies and how they work and how they fail, but people themselves and their stories and wanting to listen. If I ever sort of notice that I'm losing that, it could be an important sign of burnout. So keeping that fascination is really important. And my book is basically my attempt to share my fascination with people.
Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much.